The rain was pouring down from the sky as if it were spitting out its anger, turning the blurred lines of the rural road into a dark ribbon. The wind howled, shaking the brittle branches, and the electric charge in the air was almost tangible. Eric Bauer gripped the steering wheel until his hands turned white, trying to see through the cracked wipers at the invisible road ahead. With each jolt of the steering wheel, the unease inside him grew, and the fatigue he had pushed aside crept back into his mind like a silent intruder. He shouldn't have been here tonight, on this damned road, in the middle of this storm. At home, his little girl Lena was waiting for him. The heater had broken, cold air had filled the house, and maybe he could whip up a meal with some leftover pasta and canned corn. But then his boss had called, saying something urgent had come up. Just a few hours, he'd said. So Eric, tired and with a reminder of his empty wallet, had climbed into his old truck and hit the road. He hadn't made any money, nor had he found any peace. All he had collected was more exhaustion. At the end of a winding hill, the headlights briefly revealed something. Eric squinted. A white sedan had crashed into a tree. The front end was a twisted heap of metal, and the hazard lights were blinking weakly. It looked like the light was coming not from the car, but from a dying heart. Without thinking, Eric slammed the brakes, not caring that the truck slid as it stopped. He threw open the door and jumped out, his feet sinking into water up to his ankles. "Hey, can you hear me?" he yelled, trying to shout over the howling wind. Through the cracked windshield, he saw a silhouette, a woman, slumped against the steering wheel, motionless. "Hang on, I'm coming," he said, adrenaline surging through his veins. He tugged at the driver's door, but it didn't budge. Swearing, he ran to the other side of the vehicle. The passenger door was slightly ajar, but it was jammed by the crumpled metal. The woman moved slightly, pressing her hand against the window. Blood was dripping from her forehead. She was alive. She was scared, and she was alone. Eric braced his body against the door, gathering all his strength. His muscles strained, his breath short, but finally, the door creaked open, giving just enough space. He managed to squeeze in and pull her out. "I'm here. Don't be afraid," he said, his voice both firm and shaky. The woman flinched, panic flashing in her blurred eyes. "I'm here to help," he softened his tone. "You're not alone anymore." Like a surgeon racing against time, he carefully unbuckled her seatbelt, gently lifting her into his arms. She was light, terrifyingly light. Blood had soaked into her coat. He carried her to his truck, kicked the door open with his foot, and wrapped her in the thin blanket on the back seat. He turned the ignition, and as the truck sputtered to life, the woman slowly opened her eyes again. Eric leaned in, trying to hear the faint sound from her lips. Her voice was barely a whisper. "Don't leave me. They're looking for me. Don't trust anyone, no matter what." Eric's whole body froze. His hair stood on end. What did she mean? Who was this woman? Who was she running from? Before he could ask, the woman passed out. But nothing would ever be the same again. That night, Eric, a poor mechanic and a lonely father, was being pulled into the unknown. And his instincts were telling him that taking her to the hospital wasn't the safest option. When he pulled out his phone to call for help, the screen flickered no signal. He kept his finger on the call button, but couldn't press it. The woman's fear in her eyes, her voice, everything about her had hollowed him out. What if the wrong person answered? What if they took her back? Her words weren't just fear, they were a warning. And Eric was listening to that warning now. He turned the truck in another direction. Not to the city, not to the hospital, to the only place he felt she would be safe, his abandoned, run-down cabin on the edge of the forest. The only sanctuary he kept for Lena. Now, he was bringing a stranger there, and he didn't even know why. But one thing was clear. That night, he hadn't just saved a life. It was the moment his own life had taken a turn from which there would be no return. And nothing, not even himself, would ever be the same again. When he pushed the cabin door open with his shoulder, the cold air hit Eric's face. It felt as though the place hadn't hosted a person in years. The smell of dust, the rotting wooden floor, and the faint drizzle from the leaky roof. But at least it was safe. Eric gently laid the woman down on the old, worn-out couch. He wrapped the blanket tightly around her. She was still unconscious, but her face, those soft features, even covered in blood, she held a kind of grace. She seemed like she belonged to another world. A life of luxury, high walls, guarded doors, and now, she was here, in the middle of Eric's decaying shack. He opened the old medicine cabinet. expired drugs, dusty bandages, rusty scissors. He took whatever he could find. He cleaned the blood from the woman's forehead. It wasn't deep, but the angle was bad. As he bandaged her, he heard her let out a soft moan. But her eyes didn't open. Eric paused for a moment, his hands resting on the bandage. He noticed how wildly his heart was pounding and how his hands were still shaking. Then he heard a noise outside, a rubber sound on the wooden porch, the screech of brakes. Eric froze. No one knew this road, especially not at this hour. His heart climbed up to his throat. He moved closer to the window, peeking through the gap in the curtain. Headlights. A black vehicle. No license plate. Tinted windows. Two men got out of the car. Thick black coats. There was a determined air to their steps. These weren't police. They weren't looking for help. They'd come straight here. They knew. Eric swallowed hard, grabbing the old hunting rifle hanging from a nail on the wall. He'd only held it a few times before. He didn't know what he was doing. But one thing was clear. The woman had told him, "Don't trust anyone." And these men didn't come to help. One of the men climbed onto the porch. The other was surveying the area. A deep voice called out, "Mr. Bauer, please come out. We don't want to hurt anyone. We just want what's ours." "What's theirs?" Eric's blood ran cold. What's theirs was the woman, lying unconscious on the couch. A thing. An item. Cargo. A mistake. Not a person. Eric gripped the rifle tighter. The questions in his head were growing like an avalanche. Who was this woman? Why was she so dangerous? And why had she whispered such an important secret to him, a stranger? The silence was broken. The woman moaned, weakly lifting herself. Her eyes were half open, her gaze scattered. Eric immediately went to her. "Try to wake up. I need to ask you something. Can you run?" She squinted, shaking her head slightly. "I'll try," she whispered, her voice trembling. Eric grabbed an old hooded jacket from the top shelf and put it on her. He tucked her hair inside it, trying to keep her face in the shadows. The door was banged on again. "This is your last warning." Eric looked directly into her eyes. "We're going out the back. Through the forest." She nodded, weak but determined. Eric in front, rifle on his back, her footsteps following behind. They moved toward the kitchen. The door creaked, shattering the silence. And just then the front window shattered with gunfire. "Run!" Eric yelled, pushing the woman outside, slamming the door behind him. The rain had started again, blindingly so. But now, the rain was good. It would wash away the traces. They plunged into the forest. Eric's feet sank into the mud. Branches scratched his face, but he didn't stop. The woman was weak, stumbling several times. On one occasion, Eric turned back, scooped her up in his arms. "Hold on, we're almost there," he gritted through his teeth. Something was burning inside him now. It wasn't fear. It was anger. No one had told him anything. But everything he felt screamed. These people were dangerous. The woman was right. They really couldn't trust anyone. The voices behind them grew louder. Flashlight beams. Shouting. "They're following us," the woman whispered. "I can't give up. Not this time." Eric shook his head. "We won't." In the distance, between the trees, the silhouette of an abandoned building appeared. Collapsed, half-destroyed roof, nearly swallowed by nature. Eric entered, laid the woman down on the ground. They took cover behind an old beam. The woman was shivering. Eric took off his jacket and draped it over her. "Why did you save me?" the woman whispered, her lips trembling. "You don't even know me." Eric listened to the sound of the rain outside for a while. Then he looked into her eyes. "Because someone had to save you. And if no one else is around, then I'll be that person." The inside of the barn was freezing, but the tension inside Eric was sharp enough to push the cold aside. The woman had her arms wrapped around her knees, her eyes tired but open, her lips still bloodied. Eric sat in a corner, his back against the damp wood. The rifle rested on his lap, but his eyes were on her. It felt like hours had passed, but perhaps it had only been a few minutes. The footsteps outside had stopped. The silence was more ominous than the storm. When the woman's head rested on Eric's shoulder, the contact seemed to change everything. In that moment, she was no longer just a stranger. She was his responsibility. Her fate was now his. Then, the woman slightly lifted her head. There was a tired resolve in her eyes. "My name is Clara," she whispered. "Clara Weiss." Eric's brow furrowed. He'd heard that name. Everyone had. The missing rich girl. The one mentioned in the news for weeks, daughter of a billionaire investor. The newspapers said she had been kidnapped. hidden for ransom. But the woman standing in front of him had said, "Don't leave me. They're looking for me." Eric lowered his head. "I'm sorry, but this is too big." "What's going on, Clara? I need to know the truth." Clara was silent for a long time. When her eyes locked with his, something broke inside her. Then, she began speaking softly. "The story seems simple. I'm the daughter of a rich family. One day I disappeared. They said I was kidnapped. But the truth is much darker. My father, he's not who you think he is. Everyone thinks he's a business genius. But he's the master of dark dealings. And I overheard something I shouldn't have at the wrong time." "What did you hear?" Eric asked, his voice gruff. Clara looked away. His voice, talking on the phone with a man. "Your daughter is now a liability. She needs to be eliminated," he said. "I shouldn't have been there. But I heard it. And after that, everything changed. A stage car accident. Then he sent his men to find me. But when they found me, you were the one who saved me." Eric's head spun. He wanted to stand up, but remained rooted to the spot. "So, the people who kidnapped you were your father's own men?" Clara nodded. "And tonight, they were the ones. Black car. Guns. They're trying to destroy me. Because I know everything. And since I started running, I can't trust anyone. The police? They're working with my father. The media? They all report what he says." In that moment, Eric saw a bridge form between his past and Clara's. He, too, had been crushed under the gears of the system. He remembered the days he had bought his daughter Lena's school clothes from secondhand shops. And now, one of the men who turned those gears was doing everything he could to silence this young woman. "What happens now?" Clara asked, her eyes lost in the darkness. "Where do we go?" "Running away can't last forever." Eric took a deep breath. "I know someone. An old friend of my father's. A man who doesn't trust anyone. But he's honest. An ex-lawyer. If he's still around, he might still be able to help. At least we'll know what we're up against." Clara nodded. "But we have to be careful. One wrong move. And it won't just make me a target, it will make you one too." "I'm already in this," Eric said quietly. No turning back now. As the first light of morning began to shine, casting a wet silver glow on the earth, Eric helped Clara. Together, they left the barn and made their way down the old dirt road through the forest. The person Eric knew wasn't in the city but far from the hustle of it. An old man who ran a mechanic shop that no one paid attention to. And if he was still alive, he was the only person who knew what to do. As they walked, Clara suddenly stopped. Her eyes locked with Eric's. "Why are you helping me? What do you get out of this?" Eric thought for a moment. Then he answered honestly, "Because someone should have helped me once. But they didn't. Now it's my turn." And in that moment, something shifted in Clara's eyes. Not fear, trust. The back door of the old mechanic shop creaked under Eric's heavy knock. Despite the first light of morning, the inside was still as dark as night. The walls were lined with rusty tools, and the floor was coated with motor oil. Clara had hidden her head beneath her hood, gripping the edges of her coat tightly with her hands. With every movement, Eric's eyes were scanning the surroundings. Those men could be anywhere. They could be hiding in every shadow. When the door squeaked open, a low murmur came from inside. Eric stepped back. Then an old man appeared, gray beard, furrowed brow, his hands still covered in motor oil. "At this hour, is that you, Eric?" he mumbled. "Never thought I'd see you like this." "I never thought I'd end up in something like this either," Eric replied. "But I need help, Ben." Ben Metz was an old friend of his father's. He didn't trust anyone, but once he had done a lot for Eric's family. Now, seeing Clara, he narrowed his eyes. "Who's this?" Eric didn't waste any time. He told Ben everything. Who the enemies were, what Clara had said, her identity, the threats, everything. Ben's brow furrowed, but his expression didn't change. "This is madness," he said finally. "But there's no lie in her eyes, kid. And that's the thing I trust most." They brought Clara inside. Ben led them to a small office at the back of the shop. Eric found some old clothes and helped Clara change. Then Ben returned, holding a dusty bag and a file full of papers. "If this guy is really as big as you say, nothing will get solved over the phone. The only thing I trust in this situation," he said, setting a rusty rotary phone on the desk, "is this. But before we call anyone, we need to find something. Proof." Clara lifted her head slightly. "In my father's office, in a secret safe, everything is there. Voice recordings, documents, transfer records. It's all there. He's been collecting it for years." to use against everyone. How can you be so sure? Eric asked. Clara narrowed her eyes. Because once I accidentally opened it. I saw it. At the time, I didn't understand anything. But now, it all makes sense. Ben put his glasses on his nose. I need a plan. And time's running out. Eric, those men have already targeted you. I'm sure they're going to show you as a kidnapping suspect in the news. Eric nodded. I'm with Clara. I'll protect her. I'll do whatever it takes. Ben's gaze locked with Eric's for a moment. Then he pulled a small box from a corner. Inside, there were ID cards, a few thousand in cash, and an old phone. This is for the escape. But if you ask me, it's time to fight back. That night, Eric and Clara stayed in the old bunk room at the back of the shop. Eric was sleepless. Clara leaned against the wall, her eyes awake but empty. Eric sat beside her. Are you scared? He asked. Clara lowered her head. Every second. But more than that, I feel something else. Anger. I lived in the life they drew for me for years. Now, for the first time, I'm walking my own path. And you showed me that path. Eric smiled faintly. I just held the lantern. You chose to walk. By morning, Ben returned with a clear plan. We'll need to get into the office, he said. Through the service entrance. Clara's code might still work. If we can get in quietly, we can find the safe and take whatever we need. Clara took a deep breath. But my father, he might be prepared. Let him be prepared, Eric said. Like everyone who underestimated me, he'll be wrong. They spent the day planning every detail. Which door to enter when the building would be the quietest, how to bypass the cameras inside. An old friend had found them a car without plates. Eric and Clara would move out at midnight. And with nothing in their hands when they started, now they would be up against not just a single man but an empire worth millions. Clara turned to Eric one last time. If we fail tonight, your life could be over. Eric shrugged. My life started the moment you were unconscious in that car. Everything after this is just detail. And so, together, they stepped out into the darkness. The city was enveloped in darkness, but the building was still aglow. The massive glass towers of the Donovan Group reached up to the sky, their lights shining brighter than the stars. Clara and Eric, in an old sedan with no plates, veered off onto the back service road. They hadn't turned on the radio. The silence was both a space for thought and a shield to suppress their fear. Their hands were shaking, but there was something gleaming in their eyes, determination. Clara tucked her father's still active ID card into her pocket, hoping it would work for entry. If the code still works, we can go straight to the top floor, she said. Eric murmured a quiet, I hope so. Because if things went wrong, there would be no turning back. Once inside, everything was just as Clara had described. The service door was open, the corridors were silent, and security seemed lax. Her father still believed no one could stand in his way. They took the elevator to the top floor. Eric's heart raced a little faster with each floor they passed. When the office door opened with the code Clara entered, the scene inside was even more extravagant than she had described. The city's nightscape was visible through the skylights. The silence felt almost sacred. Clara quickly moved toward the bookshelf. When she pulled one of the shelves, a hidden panel opened. A pitch-black steel safe. Clara entered the code with trembling fingers. Eric held his breath. Beep. The lock clicked open. Inside, Clara pulled out items one by one and stuffed them into a bag. Flash drives, signed documents, handwritten notes. Some of them contained her father's voice recordings. Your daughter is now an obstacle. The matter is closed. The words echoed in Clara's mind. But just then there was a loud noise as the door slammed shut behind them. And the familiar, chilling voice filled the room. So, you finally came, Clara. When Eric turned, the guns were already raised. 5 men had silently entered the room. Each had taken their place with military precision. Behind them, impeccably dressed, hands tied behind his back, smiling Friedrich Donovan. Clara's father. Clara's body went rigid. Her lips trembled as she looked at her father, but her eyes were burning with fire. Why? She asked. Just why? I was your daughter. Friedrich took a step forward. And you were my mistake. My weakness. But I'll fix that mistake now. He turned his eyes to Eric. You're just an inconvenience. A malfunction. Eric stepped forward. He didn't have a rifle, but his eyes were full of fury. People aren't toys, Donovan. Neither your daughter, nor I, nor anyone else are your chess pieces. Friedrich smiled. You still think you're the hero of this story. But you're just a footnote. Clara will come with me now, and you will be forgotten." In that moment, Clara grabbed a small metal USB from the bag and threw it at Friedrich's face. He recoiled, a moment of shock passing over him. Eric had been waiting for that. As Clara grabbed his hand, they started running. The alarm blared, security systems activated, and red lights began flashing. When they found the fire escape 2 floors down, the pounding footsteps behind them echoed throughout the building. Clara gripped the bag tightly. Eric's shirt was soaked with sweat and blood, but they didn't stop. They were running. Because this wasn't just an escape, it was a cry. A cry for the truth, for justice, for Lena, for everything. As they emerged onto the streets, the city was already beginning to wake up. Eric hailed a taxi, threw money at the driver, and said, "Drive without stopping." Clara's face was pressed against the window. She was crying, but those tears were not of fear. They were proof of a resistance emerging from the darkness. Ben was waiting for them in an alley. They quickly hopped into the car. "Did you get it?" he asked. Clara silently nodded. "It's all here." Ben grumbled as he turned the wheel. "Then it's your turn now, Clara. This time, you're going to speak, and the world will have to listen." As the first light of morning began to awaken the city, another awakening was taking place, this time through the screens. Clara's face appeared simultaneously on all the news channels. Absent-mindedly, Eric's blanket hung over her shoulder. In the background, an old warehouse arranged by Ben appeared, safe, unnoticed, ordinary. But the determination in her voice? It was extraordinary. "I have direct recordings from my father, Friedrich Donovan. Orders he gave. Illegal fund transfers. Witness statements. And yes, the documents for the operation he planned to eliminate me. I didn't run. I was trying to survive." Suddenly, everything in the city came to a halt. The people watching the screens went quiet. In offices, cafes, bus stops, people listened in silence, not even looking at each other. A titan of the business world was falling, and the one to start that fall was a woman, born as his daughter, but for the first time speaking in her own name. Eric was right beside Clara during the broadcast. His hands were clenched, but he wasn't looking at her. Instead, he stood on guard in front of the door, always alert for an attack. But this time, none came. Ben spent the night distributing the files Clara had prepared into safe hands. Old witnesses began speaking up. They were no longer afraid. Accountants, assistants, observers who had been silenced for years began revealing the dark dealings they had witnessed. And 3 days later, Friedrich Donovan was arrested. He smiled calmly at the cameras. He had always been a man who liked control. But this time, the panic in his eyes betrayed the fact that control had slipped from his grasp for the first time. Eric was just a small mechanic. A father. That day, his name was also mentioned on the television. But the headlines didn't call him a hero. They called him the mechanic. Clara's savior. A simple man, changing a complex story. Weeks passed. Clara, now under government protection, tried to rebuild her life. The trials continued. Confessions came one after the other. Donovan's wealth was dismantled. As media interest waned, Clara began to return to her own reality. Eric, however, returned to his cabin, to Lena. A pizza from the oven, milk forgotten in a teacup. Life hadn't changed that much. But now, there was a girl looking into his eyes, braver, stronger. And one day, Lena said to him, "You've become someone out of a movie, Dad. But do you know what your greatest heroism is?" Eric smiled. "What?" "Knowing who someone truly is, just by looking in their eyes." One evening, the doorbell rang. When Eric opened it, Clara was standing there, dressed simply, with the same fragile elegance she carried in her eyes. She held a small bag in her hand, from which she pulled an old, folded notebook. "This is the last thing left from my father's office. Your name is in here. He knew you as an enemy, but I'll never forget you for the rest of my life." Eric took a deep breath. Surviving sometimes feels like a coincidence, but living, that's a choice. Clara nodded. Then, slowly, she looked at Lena. She smiled. "Your daughter is very brave, just like her father." Lena walked up to Clara without hesitation. "Can you stay with us?" Clara paused for a moment. Then she smiled. "If you'll have me." That night, for the first time in a long time, everyone sat down together for dinner at the same table. The storms had passed, but the resilience and loyalty within them still quietly shone. This wasn't a fairy tale. It never would be. But it was a real story. And some real stories. leave an everlasting mark. If this story touched you too, if you believe in the inner strength, not the outward appearance, and if you think a person's determination can shake an entire empire, don't forget to subscribe to our channel and like the video. Maybe one day, your story will be told here.